Why do we study history? An answer you've likely heard has something to do with history repeating itself and learning from our mistakes. Unfortunately, that's not right. We look to the past so we can redefine the future. The European Renaissance was a most turbulent time which resulted in extreme political centralization. Many themes in American political history can also be compared to that of Europe, but for every similarity you find, there's a difference to counteract it.
Join us as we embark on a most excellent adventure with the most bodacious bros of all time. We will explore the time from the Renaissance to the time of the Nintendo 64 by examining who has the political power within the realms and where it was being consolidated. How did they obtain such awesome power? How they enforced their power and what they used the power for? Hint, they're usually selfish jerkbags.
Political centralization has been a trend throughout all of history, kings and queens and warlords rising above the common people and establishing a dominant government. However, during the Renaissance, major political centralization occurred in three specific geographic regions. During the Renaissance, England transformed itself from a fiefdom with a weak monarchy common throughout Europe into an absolute monarchy. Feudalism is a form of decentralized government where there is a lord who owns a large piece of land and hires serfs to work the land in exchange for protection against barbarians and other lords. Feudalism as a form of government in England started to decline towards the beginning of the 14th century, and while almost non-existent past that, it wasn't officially gotten rid of until the 10 Years Abolition Act of 1660, which banned feudal land tenure. The decline was based in part due to the widespread disease like the Black Plague, better agricultural technology, and a larger amount of people working and living independent from the lords as freemen. Because of these trends, the monarchy, which was established centuries before, subdued the barons' power, and that resulted in the First Barons' War from 1215 to 1217 and the Second Barons' War from 1264 to 1267. One of the most powerful kings of England, King Edward III, led England into the 100 Years' War in 1337. It actually lasted 116 years. While eventually losing most of their claim in France, England developed a sense of national identity and allowed the government more power in order to help them coordinate the conflict. After the 100 Years' War ended in 1543, England went through a period of financial instability, resulting in the War of the Roses between 1455 to 1486, which was a war between various houses of England. This resulted in a victory for Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor would start the administrative centralization within Parliament and the local government, and eventually increase the might of the monarchy tremendously and continue the Tudor dynasty. However, in France, after the 100 Years' War with the expulsion of the English, Charles VII re-established his kingdom as the foremost power of Western Europe. He created France's first standing army since Roman times and limited papal power in the Gallican Church. But his later years were marred with quarrels with his eldest son and heir, the Dauphin Louis, who refused to obey him. The Dauphin was banished from court for his intrigues and did not return to France until his father's death. Louis XI succeeded his father in 1461. He was a lifelong enemy of Charles Martin, the court of Charles and later Duke of Burgundy. In 1465, the League of Public Weal, an alliance of the feudal princes, which consists of Charles, Duke of Berry, the king's brother, the Count Charles, the Duke of Brittany, Bourbon, Lorraine, and several others, attempted to restore their feudal prerogatives. Louis feared a further escalation of this conflict against this formidable coalition. To obtain peace, he conceded to all of their demands, like the French always do, including the Duchy of Normandy to his brother, which carried it with one-third of the offices of state. Louis seldom relied on the fortunes of war, but on intrigue and diplomacy. He maintained his power by paying pensions to well-placed people in the court of his vassals and in neighboring states. He retook Normandy from the brother at the first opportunity. He bought off Edward IV of England to desist from attacking France. He fomented rebellions in the Burgundian dominions. At the death of Charles the Bold in 1477, he seized the Duchy of Burgundy, which he claimed as a revered fief, even though the original grant did not specify the exclusion of female heirs. At the end of his reign, royal power had become absolute in France. Between 1215 to 1463, present-day Russia and Ukraine was ruled by the Mongols and the Tartars. But in 1463, city-states in present Russia and Eastern Europe started to consolidate their power and rise up against the Tartar leadership. And eventually in 1480, they would overthrow the Tartars' Golden Horde, and Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, would rise above the other princes of the various Russian city-states and rule Russia. During his reign, the empire's landmass would expand threefold.
Contrasting the extreme reorganizations of power in Europe, the United States has had very mild adjustments in the political sphere in comparison. The first most obvious example is the change from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation were drafted by colonists who were reeling in disgust away from the frightening power of a strong central government that lost the interests of some of its people. So the new government set up during and just after the revolution had very little power in comparison to the states, in hopes of better securing the individual liberties of people through closer representation and decision making. However, they soon realized that they may have given too little power to the central government, as it was shown in events like the Whiskey Rebellion that they had little power to maintain order and couldn't even raise funds directly. They just could ask the states to donate money. To make the change to a little bit stronger government, the Constitutional Convention in 1787 set up a federal government composed of many safeguards, such as separation of power and checks and balances between branches of governance, as to prevent any one branch from gaining absolute power. The new federal government at this point had power to tax the people directly, raise an army, conduct foreign diplomacy, manage interstate commerce, etc. But the addition of the Bill of Rights also guaranteed that this new power wouldn't override the individual liberties of American citizens. Another example of political centralization is shown in American history during the nullification crisis in the Reconstruction era. Leading into the Civil War, the idea of nullification was popular, especially in southern states who felt that some federal legislation was not in their best interests, i.e., restrictive tariffs supported mainly by the North. In response, some southern states declared that they nullified federal law within their state, as they felt it was not the right thing for them. This idea, along with the idea of self-determination and being slave or free, led to the eventual secession of many southern states in the following Civil War. After the North was victorious in this conflict, the USFG established military districts over southern states, and Congress passed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which gave federal authorities jurisdiction over both states and individuals who tried to deprive freedmen and women of their newfound rights. Never before had the federal government intervened so forcibly and directly on behalf of its citizens, let alone its most castigated and impoverished minority. This set a precedent of federal superiority and power over the states in large issues. Lastly, the Great Depression and the Second World War made the most dramatic shift in federal centralization since the Articles of Confederation were scrapped. After a decade of laissez-faire capitalism, the market had completely collapsed, and there was a call for the federal government to step in to help the impoverished of America. Franklin Delano Roosevelt answered the call and began to implement his New Deal, which many criticize as being socialist in nature. Millions of Americans were employed in government work programs such as the CCC. Even more extreme ideas for programs were passed around, such as a Share the Wealth program. But overall, the federal government expanded its power and influence domestically in a considerable amount.
During the Renaissance, the power was divided by two major groups, which can be further divided into three subgroups. First, the Church. During the early part of the Renaissance, under certain circumstances, could circumvent European governments to get what they wanted. They did this by talking to the Church's body in that nation in order to get the monarchs to do what they wanted. The Church also would corrupt the monarchs so they would do the Church's will. For example, the monarchs of Spain were heavily influenced by the Church, to the point where they were referred to as the Catholic monarchs. The leader of the Church was the Catholic Pope, who was a most holy jerk to those who weren't of his religion. This brings us into the second group, the monarchs. These are the kings and queens of countries such as England and France. During the Renaissance, the new monarchs took control of welfare for their societies, or in other words, they took control of taxes, tariffs, the army, religion, and the laws of the land. For example, Ferdinand II and Isabella I of Spain started the Spanish Inquisition, in which they ordered all Jews and Muslims to be killed, converted, or exiled. The monarchs also started taking more power for themselves, which was an element of political centralization. For example, the rise of the absolute monarchs in England, rather than the system of feudalism that was in use before. This caused the nobles, along with the church, to start to lose power. The nobles, who were the rich and educated people of society, held a lot of power before, and during parts of the Renaissance, they could pay the monarchs to do what they wanted them to do. But as the Renaissance went on, the kings started taking more and more power for themselves. Therefore, the rich and educated started to lose political power. This is when we start to see connections drawn to U.S. history, as well as some differences.
Throughout American history, those with power can be divided into several groups. The first group is the rich. Throughout American history, those with wealth have had far more political power than those who don't. This can be first seen in the House of Burgesses. The House of Burgesses ruled the Virginia colony before it was absorbed into the Crown's empire, and only those who owned land, aka the rich, could be a member. Also, during the Industrial Revolution, a period of much political centralization, many captains of industry emerged, such as Rockefeller and Carnegie. These men were rich, and they, along with other industry captains, had considerable political influence. Along those lines, businesses have also had a considerable amount of political power since their emergence in the post-Civil War era. The Industrial Revolution gave birth to thousands of companies and corporations that used their wealth and influence as their power within the U.S. They began lobbying Congress to act in their own interests. This can be seen in the following cartoon titled Bosses of the Senate. This cartoon depicts how the captains of industry, aka the rich, controlled a major part of the government and could influence laws and acts they wanted passed. This parallels European political power, as the governments of Europe were controlled by the rich. Those who work hard have also had much political power within the US. This can be seen in the rise of large business moguls in the late 19th century with people like Carnegie and Rockefeller. These people started with little and eventually worked their way up. They then used their power to benefit themselves and their businesses. Around this time, we can begin to see the rich to use their power to benefit others and society itself. This can be first seen in the book Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie. This book outlines how it's important that those who have wealth should use to help those without wealth. This is best seen in the excerpt from the Gospel of Wealth, in which Carnegie says,
"This, then, is held to be the duty of the man of wealth, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial result for the community, the man of wealth thus becoming the sole agent and trustee for his poor brethren, bringing to their service his superior wisdom, excellence, and ability to administer, doing for them better than they would or could do for themselves."
This quote tells of how Carnegie viewed helping those less fortunate as the duty of those who possess wealth. Lastly, those who are educated have always had political power within the US. This is first seen during the political centralization after the Revolution. Those involved in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 were educated. This can be seen in more than half of the delegates were lawyers, and in many others were bankers or physicians. This can also be seen in the fact that 75% of presidents attended and graduated from college. As is shown, both the rich and the educated had considerable political influence throughout the periods of political centralization, both American and history and European Renaissance.
According to the Oxford Dictionary, compare is defined to estimate, measure, or note the similarity or dissimilarity between. Going by this definition, it is empty to accuse two things as incomparable, because the fact that they are so different is an observation of comparison. Although, I suppose, if something is in fact unobservable, then it cannot be compared. However, this is not the case. Therefore, it is indeed fair to estimate, measure, or note similarities and differences between U.S. history and the European Renaissance. For example, we can compare the power of the Catholic Church during the reign of Pius II, who ordered the execution of 30,000 Turks, to Barack Obama, as he has not executed 30,000 Turks to our knowledge. In fact, he is in support of Turkey and their lucrative economic potential in favor of recognizing the Armenian genocide, in which an estimated 1.5 million people died.
Cue the 80s montage! Psych!